You have ruined my marriage. You have ruined my peace.
Grace, what are you doing?
David stood frozen at the bedroom door. His wife Grace was standing over his helpless father with a sharp cutlass raised high in the air. His father sat in his wheelchair, unable to move, unable to run, unable to protect himself. "You have ruined my marriage. You have ruined my peace," Grace screamed. "Today, you will leave my house, dead or alive." The cutlass was coming down fast toward Mr. Thomas's head. "Grace, stop!" David's voice exploded through the room. But before we tell you what happened next, let me take you back to where this terrible story began. Before you continue watching, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and comment below where you're watching from and what time it is in your country right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens in this story. David was a very rich man. At just 30 years old, he had more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. He made his money by buying and selling big, beautiful houses in Abuja, the capital city. Some people called him a billionaire, and they were right. David lived in a mansion that looked like a palace. The house had 12 bedrooms, a swimming pool that sparkled like diamonds in the sun, and a garden so big you could get lost in it. He drove the latest cars, a black Range Rover for regular days and a red Ferrari for special occasions. But David's biggest treasure was not his money or his houses. It was his wife, Grace. Grace was 28 years old and beautiful like a movie star. She had smooth dark skin, long braided hair, and a smile that could light up any room. David had married her 3 years ago, and he loved her more than anything in the world. He bought her expensive clothes, jewelry, and anything she wanted. Grace seemed happy too. She enjoyed the good life, shopping trips, spa days, fancy restaurants, and parties with other rich people's wives. Their life was like a sweet dream. Every morning, David would kiss Grace goodbye before going to his office. Every evening, he would come home to find her waiting with a smile. They had no children yet, but they were not worried. They had time, they thought. They had everything. But as the old people say, when the tree is standing tall and proud, that is when the wind comes to test it. One Tuesday afternoon, David's phone rang while he was in a meeting. He looked at the screen and saw it was his father calling. This was strange because his father, Mr. Thomas, almost never called during working hours. Mr. Thomas knew his son was a busy man. "Hello, Papa," David answered. "Is everything okay?" There was silence on the other end. Then David heard something that made his heart stop. His father was crying. "Papa, what's wrong? Talk to me." David jumped up from his chair. "My son," Mr. Thomas said in a weak, shaking voice. "I am at the hospital. The doctor says I have a serious sickness." David didn't wait to hear more. He told his workers to cancel all his meetings, ran to his car, and drove to the hospital like a madman. He arrived in 20 minutes, a journey that usually took 45 minutes. At the hospital, David found his father sitting on a hospital bed looking very tired and small. Mr. Thomas was 55 years old, but today he looked like he was 70. His eyes were red from crying, and his hands were shaking. A doctor came into the room. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but a serious face. "Mr. David," the doctor said, "please sit down. We need to talk about your father's condition." David sat down, his heart beating like a drum in his chest. The doctor took a deep breath. "Your father has been diagnosed with ALS. It stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. In simple terms, it is a disease that attacks the nerves in the body. These nerves control the muscles. When they die, the muscles stop working." "Can you cure it?" David asked quickly. "Money is not a problem. I can pay for any treatment, any medicine, any doctor in the world." The doctor shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry, Mr. David. There is no cure for ALS. The disease will slowly make your father's body stop working. First the legs and arms, then eventually the breathing muscles. Based on how fast his disease is moving, I estimate he has about 1 year left. The room started spinning around David. 1 year. His father, the man who raised him, who worked 3 jobs to send him to university, who taught him everything about life and business, this man only had 1 year left. No, David whispered. No, no, no. There must be something we can do. We can make him comfortable, the doctor said gently. We can give him medicine for the pain. We can provide equipment to help him move around. But Mr. David, you should prepare yourself. Your father will need full-time care. He will need people who love him around him in his final days. Mr. Thomas reached out and touched his son's hand. His grip was already weak. My son, don't cry for me. I have lived a good life. God has blessed me with a wonderful son who became successful. I am ready for whatever comes. But David was not ready. He held his father's hand and cried like a baby. He cried for a long time while his father tried to comfort him. That evening, David came home very late. Grace was waiting in the living room, watching a fashion show on their big television. David, where have you been? I've been calling you, Grace said when she saw him. Then she looked at his face and saw his red eyes. What happened? Why do you look like this? David sat down heavily on the sofa. He felt like he was carrying the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. It's my father, he said quietly. He is very sick. The doctor says he has only about a year to live. Grace's face changed. Oh no. I'm so sorry, David. That is terrible news. The disease is attacking his body, David continued. His legs are already getting weak. Soon he will not be able to walk at all. He will need a wheelchair. He will need people to help him eat, bathe, and do everything. David took a deep breath and looked at his wife. Grace, I want to bring my father here to live with us. I want to take care of him myself. I want to spend every remaining day with him. These are his last days on earth, and I don't want him to be alone in some hospital or nursing home. The smile disappeared from Grace's face immediately. She stood up from the sofa. What? David, are you serious right now? Yes, I am very serious, David said. My father raised me alone after my mother died. He sacrificed everything for me. Now it's my turn to take care of him. Grace started pacing back and forth in the living room, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. David, think about this carefully, she said. Your father will need a nurse, right? That means we will have a stranger living in our house. And you know how old people are. They always have visitors. Friends, relatives, church members. They will all be coming here every single day. Our house will be like a busy bus station. So what? David said, his voice getting louder. This is my father we're talking about. Not some stranger. I know he's your father, Grace said, crossing her arms. But David, we have a certain type of life. A quiet, private, peaceful life. Just the two of us. If your father comes here with his sickness, our whole life will change. We won't be able to go out whenever we want. We won't be able to travel. We won't have privacy in our own home. David stood up now, anger rising in his chest. Grace, are you hearing yourself? Are you really telling me not to take care of my dying father? I'm not saying that, Grace said quickly. I'm just saying there are other options. You're a billionaire, David. You can pay for the best private hospital in Nigeria. You can hire 5 nurses to take care of him 24 hours a day. You can visit him every day if you want. But why does he have to come and live here? David looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. Because he is my father, Grace. Because he is dying. Because I love him. And what about me? Grace asked, her voice rising. What about what I want? Don't I have a say in this house? You have a say, David said, trying to control his temper. But this is not negotiable. My father is coming to live with us. That is final. Grace's face turned red with anger. Her hands were shaking. But when she saw the look in David's eyes, a look that said he would not change his mind, she backed down. Fine, she said through clenched teeth. But don't say I didn't warn you when our life becomes hell. She stormed out of the living room and went upstairs to their bedroom. She slammed the door so hard that the whole house shook. David sat back down on the sofa and put his head in his hands. He didn't understand why Grace was behaving this way. Where was her compassion? Where was her humanity? But he pushed these thoughts aside. He had made his decision. His father was coming home, and nothing would change his mind. 2 weeks later, Mr. Thomas moved into David's mansion. David had prepared everything perfectly. He renovated one of the ground floor bedrooms so his father wouldn't have to use the stairs. He bought a new wheelchair, a special bed that could move up and down, and all the medical equipment the doctor recommended. He also hired a professional nurse named Nurse Florence. She was a kind, middle-aged woman with 20 years of experience taking care of sick people. The day Mr. Thomas arrived, David was so happy he was crying. He pushed his father's wheelchair through every room in the house, showing him everything. "Papa, this is your room," David said, opening the door to the beautiful bedroom he had prepared. "Look, you have your own bathroom, your own television, and these big windows so you can see the garden." Mr. Thomas looked around with tears in his eyes. "My son, this is too much. I don't deserve all this." "You deserve everything, Papa," David said, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. Now let me give back to you." Grace was watching from the doorway. She had a fake smile on her face, but her eyes were cold. When Mr. Thomas looked at her, she waved and said, "Welcome, Papa. Make yourself at home." But the way she said it, it sounded like she was swallowing poison. For the first few weeks, everything was beautiful. Every morning, David would wake up early and go to his father's room. He would push his father's wheelchair to the garden where they would sit and talk for hours. They talked about everything: David's childhood, Mr. Thomas's own father, stories from the village, funny memories, and serious life lessons. "Papa, do you remember when I was 10 years old and I stole money from your wallet to buy sweets?" David asked one morning, laughing. Mr. Thomas laughed too, though his laugh was weaker now than before. "How can I forget? I gave you the beating of your life. But you know what? Even while I was beating you, my heart was breaking because I hated to hurt you. That beating taught me never to steal again," David said, smiling. "Everything you did, Papa, was to make me a better person." These were the happiest days of David's life. Yes, his father was dying, but at least they were together. At least he could show his father how much he loved him. But while David was happy, Grace was becoming more and more angry. Grace hated everything about having Mr. Thomas in the house. She hated Nurse Florence walking around in her kitchen. She hated the smell of medicine that filled the house. She hated the special diet that had to be cooked for Mr. Thomas. Most of all, she hated the visitors. Just like she had predicted, people came to visit Mr. Thomas all the time. His old friends from the village would come. His former co-workers would come. People from his church would come. They would sit in the living room, talking loudly, laughing, praying, and eating the food Grace was forced to serve them. One evening, after a particularly long day of visitors, Grace exploded. "I can't take this any more," she shouted at David. They were in their bedroom, and she had waited all day to release her anger. "Your father had 12 visitors today. 12. Our house is like a village square now. I have no peace. I can't even walk around in my own home wearing what I want because there are always strangers here." David was tired. He had spent the whole day managing his business and taking care of his father. He didn't have energy for this fight. "Grace, these are his friends," David said calmly. "He is dying. They want to see him before he goes. Can you please have some compassion?" "Compassion?" Grace laughed bitterly. "What about compassion for me? I'm your wife. Doesn't my happiness matter?" "Of course it matters," David said. "But Grace, this is temporary. My father, he doesn't have much time left. After he's gone, everything will go back to normal." Grace's face twisted with anger. "So I should just suffer until he dies? Is that what you're saying?" "That's not what I'm saying at all," David said, his patience wearing thin. "I'm saying please be understanding. Please be kind. This is a difficult time for everyone." But Grace was past listening. She grabbed her pillow and stormed to one of the guest bedrooms. "I'm sleeping here tonight. I can't stand to be near you right now." David didn't try to stop her. He was too tired, too sad, too overwhelmed. The next day, David tried to fix things. He loved his wife, and he didn't want their marriage to fall apart. He called a meeting with Nurse Florence and set new rules. From now on, visitors can only come on Saturdays and Sundays. During the week, my father will rest, and the house will be quiet. He also moved some of his father's equipment to a storage room so Grace wouldn't have to see it all the time. He even took Grace out for an expensive dinner and bought her a new diamond bracelet. "I know this is hard for you," he told her over dinner. "I appreciate your patience. After my father is gone, I promise we'll take that trip to Dubai you've been wanting. We'll spend a whole month there, just the two of us." Grace smiled and said, "Thank you, darling. I understand now. I'll try to be more supportive." David felt relief wash over him. Maybe things would be okay after all. But he was wrong. Grace wasn't trying to be more supportive. She was planning something much, much worse. Grace had decided that she wanted Mr. Thomas out of her house, one way or another. She had tried complaining, and it didn't work. She had tried making David feel guilty, and it didn't work. Now she was going to try something else. One evening, about a month after Mr. Thomas moved in, Grace did something terrible. David had gone to Lagos for an urgent business meeting and wouldn't be back until late. Nurse Florence had gone to the pharmacy to buy more medicine. Grace was alone in the house with Mr. Thomas. She went to the kitchen and prepared his evening meal, soft rice and vegetable soup, the kind he could easily swallow. But before she took it to him, she did something evil. She added extra salt to the food. A lot of salt. She knew from hearing the doctors talk that salt was very bad for his condition. It would make his body swell up and cause him terrible pain. "Here is your food, Papa," Grace said sweetly when she brought the tray to his room. Her voice was like honey, but her heart was like stone. "Thank you, my daughter," Mr. Thomas said with a weak smile. He still called her my daughter, even though she had never shown him true kindness. Mr. Thomas ate the food slowly. With his weakened body, everything took time. He didn't notice the extra salt at first because Grace had mixed it well with plenty of spices. But 30 minutes after he finished eating, the trouble began. Mr. Thomas started feeling strange. His body began to swell. First his feet, then his legs, then his hands and face. The swelling was painful, like his skin was going to burst. He tried to call for help, but his voice came out as a weak whisper. "Help! Somebody! Help me!" By the time Nurse Florence came back from the pharmacy, Mr. Thomas was in terrible condition. She immediately knew something was very wrong. "What happened?" she screamed, rushing to check his vital signs. "Mrs. Grace! Mrs. Grace! We need to take him to the hospital right now." Grace came running into the room, pretending to be shocked and worried. "Oh my God! What's wrong with Papa?" They rushed Mr. Thomas to the hospital. David came racing from Lagos as soon as he got the call. At the hospital, the doctors worked quickly to save Mr. Thomas's life. They gave him medicine to reduce the swelling and flush out the excess salt from his system. After several hours, Mr. Thomas was stable but very weak. One of the doctors pulled David aside. "Mr. David," the doctor said seriously, "your father's food contained a dangerous amount of salt. Salt is like poison for someone with his condition. He could have died tonight." David's eyes went wide. "But how? Who would do such a thing?" The doctor shook his head. "I don't know. But you need to be very careful about who prepares his food. This was no accident. Someone put that much salt on purpose." David was confused and scared. Who would want to hurt his father? He thought maybe Nurse Florence had made a mistake, even though she swore she didn't prepare that meal. He never suspected Grace. How could he? She was his wife. She was supposed to love him and care about the things that mattered to him. Mr. Thomas stayed in the hospital for 3 days before he was strong enough to go home. During those 3 days, Grace visited once, stayed for 10 minutes, and then left saying she had a headache. David was too worried about his father to notice his wife's strange behavior. 2 weeks passed after the hospital incident. Mr. Thomas was recovering slowly, but he was more weak now than before. His disease was progressing, and the salt incident had made things worse. Grace was getting more and more frustrated. Her evil plan hadn't worked. Mr. Thomas was still alive, still in her house, still ruining her perfect life. She started having dark thoughts. Terrible thoughts. Thoughts she knew were wrong but couldn't push out of her mind. "Why won't he just die already?" she would think to herself. "Why is he taking so long?" Every morning when she woke up, she would hope to hear that Mr. Thomas had died in his sleep. But every morning, she would hear David and his father talking and laughing in the garden. It drove her crazy. Then came that terrible Saturday afternoon. The afternoon that would change everything forever. David had to go check on one of his building projects. The construction workers had called him with an urgent problem that needed his immediate attention. "I'll be back in 2 hours," he told Grace as he grabbed his car keys. "Please make sure Papa gets his afternoon medicine." "Of course," Grace said with a sweet smile. "Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of everything." David kissed her on the cheek and left. Nurse Florence had gone to the market to buy groceries. She would be back in about an hour. For the first time in weeks, Grace was completely alone in the house with Mr. Thomas. And something inside her snapped. Grace stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing. All she could think about was how much she hated having Mr. Thomas in her house. How much she wanted her old life back. How much she wanted things to go back to the way they were before he came. Then a dark idea entered her mind. An idea so terrible that even she was shocked when she thought it. What if he had an accident? She whispered to herself. What if something happened to him while nobody was here? Then he would be gone, and David would have no choice but to move on. Her hands started shaking. Was she really thinking about this? Was she really considering hurting a sick, helpless old man? But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense to her twisted mind. If Mr. Thomas was gone, all her problems would be solved. David would be sad for a while, but then he would get over it. And their life would go back to normal. Grace walked slowly to the backyard where they kept the gardening tools. Her heart was pounding like crazy. Her hands were sweating. But she didn't stop. She reached for the cutlass, a long, sharp knife that the gardener used to cut grass and trim plants. The blade gleamed in the afternoon sun. Grace picked it up. It was heavy in her hands. For a moment, she almost put it back. But then she thought about all the visitors, all the disruption, all the changes to her perfect life. Her grip tightened on the cutlass handle. She walked back into the house, down the hallway, toward Mr. Thomas's room. Each step felt like she was walking in a dream, a terrible nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. She reached his door and pushed it open slowly. Mr. Thomas was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the garden. He didn't hear her come in because his hearing wasn't very good anymore. Grace stood behind him, raising the cutlass high above her head. The blade caught the light coming through the window. Mr. Thomas must have sensed something because he started to turn his head. That's when Grace screamed, "You have ruined my marriage! You have ruined my peace! Today you will leave my house, dead or alive." The cutlass started coming down toward Mr. Thomas's head. The old man's eyes went wide with terror. He tried to move his wheelchair, but his weak arms couldn't move fast enough. He opened his mouth to scream, but only a weak sound came out. The blade was falling, 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 and then, "Grace, what are you doing?" David's voice exploded through the room like thunder. He had forgotten his phone at home and had come back to get it. He had walked into the house quietly and heard his wife's voice screaming from his father's room. Time seemed to freeze. Grace stood there with the cutlass raised above her head. Mr. Thomas sat in his wheelchair, frozen in terror. David stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock and horror. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Then the cutlass slipped from Grace's fingers and fell to the floor with a loud clang that echoed through the room. Grace stumbled backward, her hand going to her mouth. Her eyes were wild, crazy, like someone who had just woken up from a nightmare. "David! I... She couldn't form words. Mr. Thomas started crying, his whole body shaking in the wheelchair. The terror on his face was something David would never forget. David stood there, unable to move, unable to think, unable to understand what he had just seen. His wife, the woman he loved more than anything in the world, had been about to murder his helpless, dying father with a cutlass. It felt like the whole world had just turned upside down. Everyone watching this story expected David to lose his mind with rage. Everyone expected him to call the police immediately. Everyone expected him to shout, to throw things, maybe even to hurt Grace the same way she was about to hurt his father. But David did something that nobody expected. Something that shocked everyone in the room. He walked slowly toward Grace, his footsteps quiet on the floor. His face was completely calm, but tears were streaming down his cheeks like rain. He bent down and picked up the cutlass from the floor. Grace flinched, probably thinking he was going to use it on her. But instead, David walked to the window and threw the cutlass out into the garden as far as he could. Then David did something even more surprising. He sat down right there on the floor and began to cry. Not quiet tears. Not gentle sobbing. He cried like a baby who had lost everything in the world. His whole body shook with the force of his crying. He cried and cried and cried. Mr. Thomas, still in his wheelchair, was crying too. Tears were running down his wrinkled face as he watched his son break down. And then, even Grace started crying. She collapsed against the wall and slid down to the floor, crying into her hands. The three of them stayed like that for many minutes, just crying. The only sound in the room was the sound of their tears and their broken hearts. Finally, after what felt like hours, David wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at Grace with eyes that were filled with more sadness than anger. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I loved you more than anything in this world, Grace," he said. "I gave you everything. I treated you like a queen. I thought we would grow old together and have children and grandchildren. I thought we would be together forever." Grace tried to speak, but David held up his hand to stop her. "But you tried to kill my dying father," David continued. "A man who cannot walk. A man who cannot defend himself. A man who only has a few months left to live. You tried to kill him with a cutlass like he was an animal. More tears ran down David's face, but his voice stayed calm. You have killed something else too, Grace. You have killed the love I had for you. You have killed every good memory we shared. You have killed our marriage. You have killed everything. Grace threw herself at David's feet. Please, David. Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I was angry. I was not thinking straight. Please forgive me. Please give me another chance. I'll change. I promise I'll change. She grabbed his legs, begging and crying, her makeup running down her face in black streams. But David gently removed her hands from his legs and stood up. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Mr. Johnson, this is David. I need you to come to my house right now with divorce papers. Yes, right now. It's an emergency. Grace's crying got louder. No. David, please. Don't do this. I'm your wife. We took vows. For better or for worse. Please. But David wasn't listening anymore. He went to his father and knelt beside the wheelchair. Papa, are you okay? Did she hurt you? Mr. Thomas shook his head, still crying. No, my son. You came just in time. God sent you just in time. David hugged his father carefully, and they both cried together some more. Exactly 1 hour later, Mr. Johnson, David's lawyer, arrived at the house. He was a tall, serious man who had worked with David for many years. David explained everything that had happened. Mr. Johnson's face turned dark with anger. David, you should call the police, Mr. Johnson said. What she did, attempting to murder a helpless person, that's a serious crime. She should go to prison. But David shook his head. No. I don't want her to go to prison. I just want her out of my life forever. Can you prepare divorce papers right now? Mr. Johnson nodded. I can do it in 30 minutes. And he did. Using his laptop right there in David's living room, Mr. Johnson prepared the divorce papers. When the papers were ready, David called Grace into the living room. She had been in their bedroom, still crying. She came down the stairs slowly, her face swollen from crying, her eyes red, her whole body shaking. Grace, David said, his voice still calm but cold like ice, these are divorce papers. Sign them now. David, please, Grace started. Sign them now, David repeated. You have 3 hours to pack your things and leave this house. I will not send you to prison for what you tried to do, but our marriage is over. If you ever try to contact me again, I will call the police and tell them everything. Do you understand? Grace looked at the papers in Mr. Johnson's hands. She looked at David's face and saw that there was no mercy there, no second chance, no forgiveness. She took the pen with shaking hands and signed her name on the divorce papers. Her tears fell on the paper, making the ink run a little. As soon as she signed, David said, Now go pack your things. Grace went upstairs like a ghost. She moved slowly, like each step was taking all her strength. She packed her clothes, her jewelry, her shoes, everything that belonged to her. David didn't help her. He just sat with his father, waiting for her to leave. 3 hours later, Grace came down the stairs with 3 big suitcases. She looked at David one last time, hoping he would change his mind. But David didn't even look at her. He just said, Goodbye, Grace. I hope you find peace somewhere, but you will never find it in this house again. Grace walked out of the mansion and out of David's life forever. The gate closed behind her with a final, heavy sound. And just like that, it was over. After Grace left, David focused all his attention on his father. He didn't go to his office much anymore. He let his managers handle most of the business. He spent every single day with Mr. Thomas. They would wake up together in the morning. David would help his father get dressed and have breakfast. Then they would go to the garden where David had set up a comfortable area with shade and soft chairs. They would talk for hours. Sometimes they would watch football matches together. Sometimes they would listen to old music from Mr. Thomas's younger days. Sometimes they would just sit quietly, enjoying each other's company. Nurse Florence continued to take care of Mr. Thomas's medical needs, but David did everything else. He fed his father when his hands became too weak to hold a spoon. He read to him when his eyes became too tired to read. He told him jokes when his spirit was low. David never mentioned Grace's name, and Mr. Thomas never asked about her. It was like she had never existed. The months passed slowly. Mr. Thomas's condition got worse, just as the doctors had predicted. His body became weaker and weaker. He could no longer move his arms at all. Then he could no longer speak clearly. But through it all, he was never alone. David was always there, holding his hand, talking to him, making sure he knew he was loved. 8 months after Grace left, on a quiet Tuesday night, Mr. Thomas died. He died peacefully in his sleep with David holding his hand. There was no pain on his face. He looked like he was just sleeping. Before he died, in one of his last moments when he could still speak a little bit, Mr. Thomas had whispered to David, "Thank you, my son. Thank you for choosing me over everything else. Thank you for loving me. You are the best son any father could ask for in this world." Those were almost his last words. David would remember them for the rest of his life. The funeral was big and beautiful. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Everyone talked about what a good man Mr. Thomas had been and what an amazing son David was. David cried at the funeral, but they were different tears from the ones he had cried that terrible day with Grace. These tears were mixed with peace. He had done everything he could for his father. He had no regrets. He had been there until the very end. After his father's death, David threw himself into his work. He expanded his business and became even more successful. He donated money to hospitals that took care of people with ALS. He started a foundation in his father's name to help families who were dealing with terminal illnesses. But he remained single. Many women tried to get close to him. Beautiful women, educated women, rich women, they all wanted to marry the handsome billionaire. But David always said no. His friends would ask him, "David, when will you marry again? You're still young. You can't stay alone forever." David would smile sadly and say, "I'm not ready for love again. My wife tried to kill my father, a man who couldn't even defend himself. She tried to kill him because he was an inconvenience to her perfect life. How can I trust anyone after that? How do I know the next woman won't turn into a monster when things get difficult?" But there was someone else in David's life who had never left. Someone who had been there through the darkest days. Someone who had witnessed everything. Nurse Florence. Even after Mr. Thomas died, Nurse Florence kept checking on David. She would call him every week to see how he was doing. Sometimes she would bring him food because she knew he wasn't eating well. She would sit with him in the garden and listen when he needed to talk about his father. "You were a good son," she would tell him. "Your father died happy because of you." David was grateful for her kindness. Nurse Florence had become like family to him. One day, about a year and a half after his father's death, Nurse Florence came to visit David with someone special. "David, I want you to meet my daughter, Blessing," Nurse Florence said with a warm smile. "But wait. Before we continue with what happens next, I need to hear from you. What did you think about David's decision? Was he right to divorce Grace immediately, or should he have given her a second chance? And that moment when he just sat down and cried instead of calling the police, did that surprise you? While you're typing your answers, let me tell you, this story is not over yet. Remember Nurse Florence just introduced her daughter, Blessing? Well, what happens next will either restore your faith in love, or break your heart all over again. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now because you don't want to miss what's coming. Are you ready? Let's continue. David looked up from where he was sitting in the garden. Standing next to Nurse Florence was a young woman he had never seen before. Blessing was 26 years old, but there was something timeless about her. She wasn't wearing expensive clothes or heavy makeup like the women who usually tried to get his attention. She wore a simple dress and flat shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. But it was her eyes that caught David's attention. They were warm, kind, and full of life. "Good afternoon, sir," Blessing said with a respectful smile. She didn't rush to shake his hand or invade his space. She simply stood there, waiting. "Please, call me David," he said, standing up. "Any daughter of Nurse Florence is family to me." They sat together in the garden that afternoon. Blessing told him she was a primary school teacher in a small town about 2 hours away from Abuja. She taught Class 3 students, 7- and 8-year-olds who still believed in magic and dreams. "They're the best age," Blessing said, her face lighting up. "Old enough to understand lessons, but young enough to still see wonder in everything. Yesterday, one of my students told me that if he studies hard, he wants to become president so he can make sure every child has food to eat." David found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. "That's beautiful. Do you think he will?" "I don't know if he'll become president," Blessing said thoughtfully. "But I know he has a good heart. And sometimes, that's more important than being president." Something about the way she spoke, so genuine, so unpretentious, made David feel at ease. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't asking about his money or his houses. She was just being herself. Before she left that evening, Blessing said something that stayed with David. David, my mother told me about your father. I never met him, but I know he must have been a great man to raise a son like you. Not many people would give up their comfort to care for a dying parent. That takes real love." After she left, David sat alone in the garden for a long time, thinking. For 2 years, he had built walls around his heart. He had told himself he would never trust a woman again. But something about Blessing made those walls feel a little less necessary. "Don't be a fool," he whispered to himself. Grace seemed nice too at first. But a small voice in his heart whispered back, "Not every woman is Grace." The next time Blessing came to visit her mother, she stayed for a whole weekend. And the weekend after that. And the one after that. David found excuses to be around whenever she visited. He would invite both Nurse Florence and Blessing for dinner. He would ask Blessing about her students. He would drive them both to church on Sunday mornings. Slowly, carefully, like a man learning to walk again after an injury, David began to open his heart. One Saturday afternoon, David asked Blessing if she wanted to see his charity foundation, the one he had started in his father's memory to help families dealing with ALS and other terminal illnesses. "I would love to," Blessing said immediately. At the foundation, David showed her everything. The medical equipment they provided to families who couldn't afford it. The support groups for caregivers. The counselors who helped children cope with losing their parents. "This is incredible, David," Blessing said, her eyes shining with tears. "Your father would be so proud." They were standing in front of a wall covered with photos and thank you letters from families they had helped. David felt emotion rising in his throat. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough," he said quietly. "My father suffered so much in his last year. And I couldn't save him." Blessing turned to face him. She didn't touch him, but her presence felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. "David, you did something more important than saving him," she said softly. "You loved him. You stayed with him. You made sure he didn't die alone and forgotten. That's not failure. That's the most beautiful thing one human being can do for another." Something broke open inside David's chest at those words. Without thinking, he reached out and took Blessing's hand. She didn't pull away. She just squeezed his hand gently and smiled. That was the day David admitted to himself that he was falling in love again. Over the next few months, their relationship grew like a plant in good soil, slowly, naturally, strongly. They talked on the phone every night. David would drive to her town on weekends to take her to dinner. Blessing would come to Abuja and cook for him, simple, delicious meals that tasted like home. But David still hadn't told her about Grace. He hadn't told her about the Cutlass, the attempted murder, the divorce. He was afraid. Afraid that if Blessing knew how badly he had been betrayed, she would think he was broken. Damaged goods. One evening, as they sat in his garden watching the sunset, Blessing said something unexpected. "David, you don't have to tell me about your ex-wife if you're not ready. But I want you to know something. Whatever happened, it doesn't change how I see you. You're a good man. And when you're ready to talk, I'll be here to listen." David looked at her in surprise. "How did you know I was thinking about that?" Blessing smiled sadly. "Because whenever we get close, I see fear in your eyes. Like you're waiting for me to hurt you. And I understand that. Whoever she was, she must have hurt you very badly." That day, David told Blessing everything. About Grace's complaints. About the salt in his father's food. About walking in to find his wife holding a cutlass over his helpless, dying father. Blessing listened without interrupting. When he finished, tears were running down her face. "I'm so sorry you went through that," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Are you afraid of me now?" David asked. "Afraid that I can't trust? That I'm too damaged?" "No," Blessing said firmly. "I'm proud of you. You protected your father. You chose what was right even though it cost you your marriage. That takes courage. And David, trust isn't something you give once and it's done. Trust is something we build together, day by day, choice by choice." For the first time since his father's death, David felt like he could breathe fully again. Everything was going beautifully. David had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have love again. Real love. The kind that doesn't run away when things get difficult. Then something happened that would test everything. David's gateman, a quiet man named Joseph, had worked for him for over 5 years. Joseph was about 50 years old, with a wife and 4 children in the village. He was always polite, always on time, always did his job well. But like many workers, he was almost invisible. People barely noticed him. One Thursday afternoon, Joseph collapsed while opening the gate for a visitor. David was in a business meeting when his house manager called. "Sir, the gateman has collapsed. We've called an ambulance." David felt his chest tighten. Sickness. Hospitals. Dying. All the memories of his father came flooding back. "Take him to the hospital," David said, his voice cold and distant. "Make sure all the bills are paid. Keep me updated." He hung up and tried to focus on his meeting, but his hands were shaking. He couldn't do this again. He couldn't watch another person suffer and die. It was too much. That evening, when the house manager gave him an update, David listened with a stone face. "The doctors say he has severe malaria and typhoid, sir. He's very weak. He'll need to stay in the hospital for at least a week, maybe 2. "Fine. Pay whatever is needed," David said. Then he walked away. He didn't visit Joseph in the hospital. He couldn't. Every time he thought about it, he saw his father in that hospital bed, swollen and in pain. Blessing came to visit that weekend. She noticed immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked. David told her about Joseph, and about how he couldn't bring himself to visit the hospital. "I know I should go," David said, his voice tight. "But I can't. I can't." Blessing squeezed his hand. "It's okay. You're still healing from your father's death. Nobody expects you to be perfect." But the next morning, Blessing asked David's driver to take her to the hospital where Joseph was staying. David didn't go with her. He stayed home, working in his office, trying not to think about it. Blessing found Joseph in a crowded general ward. He was lying on a thin mattress, looking small and forgotten. No family members were with him because they lived far away and couldn't afford the transport money. When Joseph saw Blessing, he was confused. "Madam, do I know you?" "I'm David's friend," Blessing said with a warm smile. "I heard you were sick, and I wanted to check on you." Joseph's eyes filled with tears. "Madam, thank you. But you didn't have to come. I'm just a gateman." Those words, "I'm just a gateman," hit Blessing hard. She sat down on the plastic chair next to his bed. "Mr. Joseph, you're not just anything. You're a father, a husband, a man who works hard every day. Your life matters." For the next hour, Blessing sat with Joseph. She asked about his family. She listened to him talk about his children and their dreams. She held his hand when he cried about being afraid he might die and leave his children orphaned. When visiting hours ended, Blessing went to find the doctor. "How can I help make him more comfortable?" she asked. The doctor looked surprised. "Are you family?" "No, but I care about him," Blessing said simply. The doctor explained that Joseph needed better food to regain his strength, and he would recover faster in a private room where he could rest properly. Blessing called David. "Can we move Joseph to a private room? And can we arrange for proper meals?" David agreed immediately, grateful that Blessing was handling it because he couldn't. But Blessing wasn't done. Over the next week, she visited Joseph in the hospital every single day. Sometimes she brought him home-cooked soup. Sometimes she just sat and talked to him so he wouldn't feel alone. The hospital staff started talking. "Why is that rich woman visiting a gateman every day? Maybe she's trying to impress her boyfriend. It's probably for show. She'll stop soon." One of David's business associates saw Blessing at the hospital and called David. "Why is your girlfriend wasting her time on your gateman? Doesn't she have better things to do?" David felt anger rise in his chest, but he said nothing. On the 5th day of Joseph's hospitalization, Blessing arrived at the hospital looking exhausted. She was a teacher, and her own work was suffering because she was spending so much time at the hospital. Her principal had warned her that she was taking too many days off. That day, when she entered Joseph's room, she sat down heavily in the chair. Joseph noticed immediately. "Madam, you look so tired. Please, you don't have to keep coming. You've already done so much." For a moment, just a brief moment, Blessing felt it. The exhaustion. The inconvenience. The voice in her head saying, "He's right. You've done enough. Nobody expects you to keep doing this. You're not his family. You're not responsible for him." She could stop. She should stop. She was risking her own job for a man she barely knew. But then Blessing looked at Joseph, this man lying in a hospital bed, alone, afraid, dismissed by society as unimportant. And she remembered something her mother once told her: the measure of a person is not how they treat people who can help them, but how they treat people who can't. Blessing took a deep breath and smiled. "Mr. Joseph, I'm tired, yes. But I'm not too tired to sit with a friend. Now, tell me, how are you feeling today?" Joseph started crying. "Madam, why are you so kind to me? Nobody has ever treated me this way." "Because you matter, Mr. Joseph," Blessing said softly. "Your life matters. And as long as I can be here, I will be." What Blessing didn't know was that David had come to the hospital that day. He had finally forced himself to face his fears and check on Joseph. But when he arrived, he didn't go into the room immediately. He stood outside the door, listening. He heard Blessing's tired voice. He heard her struggle. He heard her choose compassion anyway. And in that moment, David saw it clearly. This was the exact situation where Grace had failed. A sick, helpless person who needed care. Inconvenience. Disruption to normal life. The choice between comfort and compassion. Grace had chosen violence and hatred. Blessing chose kindness and sacrifice. David leaned against the wall, tears streaming down his face. Not every woman was like Grace. Not every woman ran away when things got hard. Not every woman saw vulnerable people as obstacles. This woman, this beautiful, tired, imperfect woman sitting in a hospital room with his gateman, was different. She was real. She was what love actually looked like. David walked away without entering the room. He didn't want to interrupt. But his heart, which had been frozen for 2 years, finally began to thaw. Joseph recovered fully and went back to work 2 weeks later. On his first day back, he told David, "Sir, that woman you're with, she's an angel. Don't let her go." David smiled. "I don't plan to, Joseph. I don't plan to." 2 months after Joseph's recovery, on a Saturday morning, David's security called him with unexpected news. "Sir, there's a woman at the gate. She says her name is Grace. She says she's your ex-wife." David's blood ran cold. "Tell her to leave," David said immediately. "Sir, she says she'll wait outside until you see her. She's been standing there for 30 minutes already." David looked out his window and saw her. Grace was standing outside his gate, looking thin and tired. She was wearing a simple outfit, nothing like the designer clothes she used to wear. Her hair was pulled back, and even from a distance, he could see she had been crying. Blessing was in the house that day. She had stayed over the night before, and they were planning to have breakfast together. "Who's at the gate?" Blessing asked, noticing David's tense expression. "It's Grace," David said quietly. "My ex-wife." Blessing's face didn't change. She didn't panic, didn't get jealous, didn't demand anything. She simply said, "Do you want me to leave so you can talk to her alone?" "No," David said firmly. "I want you to stay. But I think I need to hear what she wants." Blessing nodded. "Then I'll be right here when you get back." David walked outside to the gate. He didn't open it. He stood on his side, and Grace stood on hers, with metal bars between them. "What do you want, Grace?" David asked, his voice cold. Grace looked awful. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her hands were shaking. "David, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please give me another chance. I'm so sorry for what I did. I was sick. I was evil. But I've changed. I've been in therapy. I've been praying. Please, David. I'll do anything. Just let me come back." David felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no love. Just emptiness where she was concerned. "Grace, do you remember my father?" he asked quietly. "Yes, of course. Do you remember standing over him with a cutlass? Do you remember trying to kill a man who couldn't even defend himself?" Grace started crying harder. "I was crazy. I wasn't thinking straight. David, people make mistakes. Mistakes." David's voice rose. "Grace, you tried to murder my dying father. That wasn't a mistake. That was evil. And I will never, ever forgive you for that. But you've moved on." Grace said desperately, "I heard you have a new woman now. If you can love someone else, why can't you forgive me?" "Because the woman I love now has shown me what real love looks like," David said firmly. "She sat in a hospital for weeks taking care of my gateman, a man she didn't even know, because she has compassion in her heart. She chose kindness when it cost her something. You chose violence and hatred. We are not the same. Grace's face crumpled. "David, please. Go home, Grace," David said, turning away. "Move on with your life. Find peace somewhere. But you will never find it here. What we had is dead. You killed it the day you raised that cutlass." David walked back to his house without looking back. Grace stood at the gate crying for another 10 minutes before she finally left. When David came back inside, Blessing was waiting in the living room. She stood up when she saw his face. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. David crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. He held her tight, like a man holding on to life itself. "I'm more than okay," he whispered. "I'm free." That day, David realized something important. He had been carrying Grace's betrayal like a heavy stone in his heart. But Blessing's consistent, quiet, unglamorous love had slowly chipped away at that stone until it finally crumbled. He was ready. Ready to trust again. Ready to love again. Ready to build a future again. David had been planning this for months. He wanted everything to be perfect. It was a Saturday evening, exactly 2 years since Blessing had first entered his life. He had invited her to dinner at his house. Nothing unusual since they had dinner together at least 3 times a week now. But today was different. David had transformed his garden into something magical. String lights hung from every tree, creating a canopy of stars. Rose petals covered the path leading to a beautifully decorated table in the center. Soft music played from hidden speakers. When Blessing arrived and saw the garden, her hand flew to her mouth. "David! What is all this?" "This is me," David said, taking her hand, "trying to show you how much you mean to me." They had dinner, Blessing's favorite foods, prepared by the best chef David could find. They talked and laughed like they always did. But David was nervous. His hand kept going to his pocket where the ring box was hidden. After dinner, David stood up and reached for Blessing's hand. "Come walk with me," he said. They walked through the garden together, hand in hand, until they reached the spot where David used to sit with his father. A bench under a large tree, overlooking the garden. "This was his favorite place," David said quietly. "My father loved sitting here. We had our best conversations right here on this bench." Blessing squeezed his hand, understanding the significance. "Blessing," David began, his voice shaking slightly. "2 years ago, I was a broken man. I thought I would never trust anyone again. I thought love was just a trick, something that looked beautiful but turned poisonous when you got close." Tears were already forming in Blessing's eyes. "But then you came into my life," David continued. "And you showed me, day by day, choice by choice, that real love exists. You showed me compassion. You showed me patience. You showed me that not everyone runs away when things get difficult." David got down on one knee, and Blessing gasped. He pulled out the ring box and opened it. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring, simple, elegant, perfect. "Blessing, you brought light back into my darkness. You made me believe in love again. You made me believe in myself again. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you the same love you've shown me." Blessing's hands were shaking, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "Blessing, will you marry me?" The garden was silent except for the soft music and the sound of Blessing crying. David's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. This was it. The moment everything changed. Blessing looked at the ring, then at David, then back at the ring. She opened her mouth to speak. "Quick. In the comments right now, tell me, do you think Blessing will say yes or no? Type yes if you think she'll accept. If you've watched this far, you are amazing. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss beautiful stories like this video. If you're enjoying David and Blessing's story, turn on notifications so YouTube tells you when we drop beautiful stories. Share this video with your friends and family who love good stories. Thank you so much for watching. May God bless you and keep you safe. Remember, Real love is patient, real love is kind, and real love never gives up.